Hey guys. So what happened today? What was all that? Besides my getting fed up this morning when I woke up in a tremendous amount of pain and was just done waiting. Not done fighting, done waiting. So a few hours after that, I open Twitter and I see this tweet from one of our non-federal working group advocates. And guess what this said? This said that they heard us, they saw our petition, thank you for the petition, they thanked us, and they heard us, and that it's going to come up in the meeting today's working group meeting, and it did. So, shocker, we were heard, we did it, we got heard. And Holiday even mentioned that we almost had 1,500 signatures, and it's only been up for a matter of days. So we did that. We have united, and we're figuring out how to get loud, and nothing's going to stop us now. So they saw our petition, they heard us, and they acted on it. So here's what happened in the meeting. So first of all, what is the TBDWG? What in the world does that mean? So it is a federal advisory committee. That means that there's this group of people, this panel of people that does some work, and then they advise the federal government. This one's about tick-borne infections, and so Lyme disease. And they get to write a report to Congress. And so they're this authority group, and they advise Congress on something. That's a federal advisory committee. So what our advocates did is they recommended that a new one is created, and one was just denied, voted out at the last meeting. The feds and their trolls decided we weren't going to get a new working group, tick-borne disease working group. So this was another kind of working group, with a slightly different goals, and they weren't asking for as much, but our advocates tried to get us a new federal advisory committee. And so the feds and their trolls decided, no, we're not going to get that. So there are 7 non-federal members on the working group. They always put in people they know will vote with them in our slots. So we only have 4 real advocates on the working group. Those 4 tried to get us this federal advisory committee, and they worked hard. And so the first one is denied. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't watch it, because it's really educational to watch how this goes. What you will see is the 2 feds that do these things, the CDC guy and the NIH guy, arguing how an FAC, a Federal Advisory Committee, can't work. This can't happen. And the reason they don't want this to happen is because then we would have a vote. They don't want us to have a vote. They don't want us to have a say in how anything goes. They'll say, oh, sure, yes, of course we will engage the patients. But they want to engage us by having IDSA represent us. Like the last meeting, they already killed an FAC, a Federal Advisory Committee recommendation, a bigger one than this one was going to be, and said, well, we'll just brief the patients at IDSA meetings. If you know anything about Lyme disease, IDSA does not represent Lyme patients. They're a big part of why we're here. So the goal of the feds in this clip you're about to hear is to keep us from having a vote. Step 1, step 2, part 2, whatever you say, is to maintain control of whatever this thing that the advocates are trying to create for us is. They want control of it. Oh, it can be a this or it can be a that, with the whole goal being HHS or some other agency mechanism controls what this thing is and what comes out of this thing. And they control who goes on it. So they can keep putting people like Wormser and Shapiro on it so that they have the vote and they can control what comes out of these things, so that all that the federal agencies have done for the last 40 years is never exposed. And the new things that they're doing keep from being exposed. Like everything that's driving Lyme disease medicine is to keep the past covered up. Like we can't do squat to get Lyme medicine progressing because we have to keep the past covered up. It's a bunch of, yeah. So that's what's interesting about what you're about to hear. So that's what happens throughout most of it. And then at the end, that Federal Advisory Committee is voted against, of course, because they have the 3 guys who will vote with them and they control the vote. And 2 people abstained. You know, Twitter's a wonderful thing. If we figure out who the people are that abstained and convince them don't abstain, then I think the vote would have gone the other way. And if we could get at least one of the guys, you're not going to get 2 of the trolls to change their vote, but one of the trolls, I can't call him a troll, I guess, one of the people who voted with the feds, who I wasn't sure always votes with the feds, but he sure did this time and screwed us over. Maybe he could change his vote. But tonight, they lead into the second part of the video, and the second part of the video is when our advocate Betty brings up another recommendation. So they didn't let us have the FAC, and they kind of like dangled, well, we'll do something else, you know, for us. They're going to kill that one, but, you know, for this whole building bridges facade, we'll let you have something else. And so the next something else is what our advocates are investigating tonight. If we can't have a federal advisory committee, what other federal level government mechanism is there that patients will get something from? So in Lyme medicine, we'll get something from. So I don't know, they were talking about things like I don't know the words for, so I can't brief you on that. But those words that you're going to hear, they're this thing of what else we can have that would give us some kind of say in how things are going with Lyme medicine. And if we get some kind of thing, then that gives us like some credentials so that when we don't behave like they want us to and we're not controlled like they want us to, like nobody will volunteer that is a real advocate for this crap because they know the feds always control it. But if we actually had something that would give us some credentials and got enough people on it that don't cave to the people that control Lyme medicine, then even if we don't have the vote, we can put something out and we have those credentials on our back. So we can still spill all the beans. We can still expose and disclose. And we can still change Lyme medicine, finally. So that's what happened today. It's exciting. And tomorrow will be the rest of the story. And it starts at 12 Eastern Standard Time. And this is the very first thing on the agenda after public oral comments. So people are giving their verbal comments tomorrow. And then this is the first thing on the agenda is this other mechanism thing that they made it sound like they would go for because they don't think it's going to have much of an issue for them because they're going to control it. But even if they control it, is there anything we can get out of it? So that's where we're at. You guys, you made a difference. Everybody who signed the petition, everybody who's going to sign the petition, you're awesome. What we've gotten from Lyme is, I need a moment, our ability to keep fighting. It has fine-tuned us, beat us down, made us build ourselves back up into our true selves and who we are. And now we have this ability to keep fighting no matter what. You keep hoping. And we've done that. And we're here. And we're now. And we're fighting finally. And we're united because we've all been through this experience and we know what each other has gone through. And, you know, there are no words. You don't have to say anything. We know what that other person's been through. We know what they've survived, and we know what that took. And so that's where we are, and that's where it unites us, and we're going to kick some butt. And our advocates did us right today. They did a good job. I hope they write minority reports, and I hope they kick ass. But right now, today was good. All right, even though we didn't get the Federal Advisory Committee, they were never going to let us have that. So maybe we'll get something, but at least our advocates listen to us. It's never happened before. We've never tried this before. Like, nobody's ever done this. So it's happening, and it's going to keep happening because we've found a way to be loud and united. Alrighty, enjoy the video, and don't let it get you down. Like, we know their tactics, we can fight their tactics. Just, expose somebody who's like constantly lying and stuff, then everybody knows they're lying and nobody believes them anymore. So don't let it get you down. It just, now we know. I knew, but now you know. Alrighty? Great. See you tomorrow. It's going to be cool. Bye-bye.
Great, thanks, Holiday. So I think the next agenda item is to look at the access to care. And I think there we still have to go and look at the recommendations, and I'd like to start with the recommendations if possible. I believe that Rebecca and Betty have put up a new version of their first recommendation, and if we could bring that up and have that read, that would be great.
Okay, so recommendation 5.1, provide funding for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to sponsor a federal advisory committee utilizing subject matter experts, including public stakeholders, to conduct a comprehensive review of the basic science and clinical evidence of Lyme disease.
Great, thank you, Kat. I think Betty had wanted to start with kind of an explanation of how she came to this reworded version. Betty, can I put you on the spot and give you a chance to describe your thinking behind this revision?
Well, I welcome the opportunity, so thank you, Lyndon. Yes, so I really had thought about everything that's gone on, and just even considering the editing that we just did, is that I think there continues to be disagreement over what the facts are. And everyone sometimes comes to reading a paper through their particular lens, those of us who have been involved with tick-borne disease. And sometimes that can interfere with your ability to actually analyze and see what's there or not there. And so there are people who are subject matter experts on how to conduct and analyze trials, who are somewhat agnostic to tick-borne disease, but I think who could really help us come to an understanding of what the science is showing. Because if we have an accepted understanding of the scientific evidence, then we can move on from there. You still might get divergent viewpoints on how to handle things, particularly if it becomes clear that there's a lot of scientific unknowns. But I think it would be very helpful. And so has always been my initial goal, but I, as a little person in Minnesota, am not going to be able to pull those people together, but the federal government has the power to do that. And so this takes it away from pointing fingers at any agency, but just kind of all focuses our attention back on the science. And I know this is awkward to say, but it also really addresses the very significant concerns that we're hearing from the patient community. We know that there's a petition out there from the patient community that really wants us to continue in a way that gives them a voice. And they feel that a federal advisory committee is really the only avenue where they feel any confidence that their voices are truly heard. And I think if we were smart, if we approved a new advisory committee that wasn't as far in scope as this one. I mean, it's just going to look at one or two things in Lyme disease, the most contentious or the ones that have the most patient involvement. It wouldn't have to eat up a lot of time of the federal members. And I know that some advisory committees the federal members really are ex officio, so they're not doing the work. So therefore, we could do something that doesn't eat up the time and energy of our federal members who want to be spending their time implementing previous recommendations. So that's kind of the gist of what I was going for. And if Rebecca wants to add anything, I'd be happy that she did.
Thanks, Betty. Nothing to add to that.
Jennifer.
You know, to my point earlier about the gap in the recent literature that wasn't even addressed in our working group reports, are you mainly referring to the research from the last, 4 to 6 years, or in this comprehensive review, or are you meaning for other?
I do mean to go back, because some of the trials in Lyme disease are very old. There haven't been new, for instance, clinical trials. And so what we think is our foundational understanding, I'm not all sure that what we think we know is what the science is actually saying. So I would just like us to have an independent look by people who can really help us understand the science.
Monica?
Right. Yeah, I just want to sort of clarify that this is not the FACA that we voted on before, but this would be like an advisory panel sponsored by HHS, focused exclusively on reviewing the literature as it pertains to public education and clinician education. And I think I too am aware of the petition and the need to involve the public in terms of their ability to provide comments throughout the process, because I think there's as uncomfortable as Betty mentioned it as it is to say, I think there's concern that at the end of this working group, we hand everything over to the government and no longer do all the stakeholders have a voice. And so I think, this is an potential avenue for involving all stakeholders in the next iteration of implementation for the working group. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. Ben?
Well, I don't know if Betty was going to reply to Monica. She's welcome to go and do that. Otherwise, I have another thought that I wanted to put out.
Thanks, Ben. I would reply to Monica. Yes, this was intended to be an advisory committee that is there to say it's to inform, but not to make additional recommendations. So it sometimes the federal government just needs experts to give them information, and I think this is what I was intending. Nothing beyond that. So thanks, Ben, for letting me.
Great. Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I read this and provide funding, to sponsor a federal advisory committee to pull this group together just to review the basic science and clinical evidence. I am struggling with how that is a role of a federal advisory committee, because by definition, I thought they made consensus recommendations to the government. Maybe I'm wrong, but what I was thinking, Betty, that would make more sense to me, because I think this is a great idea. But why not say provide funding to HHS to sponsor an Institute of Medicine workshop, to do this very thing, and to actually to take all that information and put it together with public involvement is all. And to the point, maybe you've heard about this or not, but the Cohen Foundation, together with us at CDC and I think HHS as well, have funded and will be sponsoring National Academies of Science, Education, and Medicine, Engineering and Medicine, NASM workshop this summer in June to look specifically at chronic disease outcomes from infectious diseases as causes of chronic illness, okay? And with the idea of using persistent Lyme disease, post-long COVID, MECFS, to pull people together who are experts in all of these areas and to really define the state of the science, to do a comprehensive review of what we know about this issue, and then to put together, some sort of thoughts and recommendations to guide the science in this field, which is what IOM and NASM do such a great job at. So I would just suggest, the recommendation I would be supportive of would be to provide HHS funding to sponsor an IOM workshop on this topic. That to me would make sense as the way forward on this rather than a federal advisory committee. That I just don't think that's, to me, I'm struggling with why do it that way. Over.
Betty, I'll give you another chance if you want to respond directly to Ben before I go to Holiday.
I like your idea, but I guess I'm still trying to work in that patient involvement angle, the public. But I do want, maybe we can ask Jim, because it was my understanding that there are some federal advisory committees that just say, hey, we've slogged through this for you and here's what you need to know. So that are more informative rather than making recommendations. But maybe Jim or Kay or someone knows could jump in or answer that specific question.
Hello, Betty. I'll start out and then I'm going to turn it over to Kay. I mean, my experience is that I'm the designated federal officer for the Advisory Committee on Blood and Tissue Safety and Availability, and we do make recommendations. We aren't just there we can provide information, but we also have the capability of making the recommendations based on what we feel is important for the HH Secretary to be cognizant of.
But could you exist if you didn't make a recommendation?
Well, it depends what's in the charter. The charter is the Bible for the federal advisory committees, and each of the federal advisory committees, based on what their directives are, whether it be from Congress, whether it be from the Secretary, or what they're to do. If they want recommendations, then it's in the charter, and that's what that committee provides. Kate, can you add any additional? I know you're the designated federal officer for the Presidential Advisory Committee on HIV/AIDS.
Sure. I think Jim and Ben actually captured it. I know we provide advice, recommendations to the Secretary, being an advisory body. So sort of inherent in that is making either recommendations, et cetera, to the Secretary. So gathering a group to review and not make recommendations seems like it would not be consistent with the Federal Advisory Committee. That sounds like it's something else other than that. But I don't know if that's answering your question, Betty.
Well, no, it's not, because what I'm asking is there an advisory committee that functions slowly to say, we have slogged through these things and we are advising you as these are the facts. So they're not making a recommendation about what to do with the facts, but they're saying in our review, we'd have determined these are the facts regarding treatment efficacy, regarding patient subgroups.
So then you would be talking about advising the Secretary to, is what I heard you say.
Yes.
Okay. No, I mean, I think then it relies on what the charter specifies and how that charter is written, that you're providing advice and counsel to the Secretary on X, Y, and Z. The charter is really the sort of the raison d'etre of how the work is done and what stipulates what your sort of lane is in that advisory capacity.
So Oh, I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. Thank you, Kay, that helped.
Thank you,
Sure.
Kay. Yep, thank you, Betty. Holiday?
Thanks. So just a couple touch points here. I looked at the petition that is circling right now of patients who want to be involved. And they're at 1,450 signatures right now. So just to let everyone know, and I think it just started in the last couple of days. Betty, back to your thing. I mean, we've been over this a couple of times, but first of all, so a federal advisory committee can only give recommendations unless it's said in the charter. But in the charter, that is not, we as non-feds are not a part of the charter, designing the charter at all. It is only done by the federal government. So I don't know, and Kay, Jim, you could step in here. I don't know of any federal advisory committees that do not give recommendations and only advise. So I think it's going to be hard because we're not going to be in charge of the charter.
Betty?
Oh, Holiday, you kind of said it spot on, because in reviewing, for example, in reviewing information and providing advice, it's there in that next link to what are you doing with that advice? It would be going to Admiral Levine and the secretary ultimately as the HHS officials. So there is a next step to beyond sort of meeting to provide advice. It's something we'd have a responsibility to move it forward to the next responsible party in HHS.
So just to respond to Holiday, so I've never met a government agency that didn't like people to do their work ahead of time for them. So if we could suggest a charter, lay out what the vision is, because that would be helpful to them, right? And just because something hasn't been done doesn't exclude it from the realm of possibility. So why is it important to tell HHS, the secretary, what the experts think the facts of the science are? Is because various HHS agencies are staking out positions on things that might not actually be the facts. So it is a very important tool for HHS to have, and I don't know how else to get them. I do, however, want to say that IOM has a lot of respect. And so I like that idea, but we really have to really think long and hard about that. We got the right stakeholders in that meeting. And the participants, we'd almost want to list them out, I think, Ben, and I don't know if we have time to do that today, but it's not that I'm opposed to that idea, but I still keep coming back to giving a voice to the people who feel relatively voiceless, and I don't have another mechanism for that. Thank you.
Lyndon, can I just respond to Betty real fast? Betty, so I sent you a while ago, if you remember, I worked really hard on a new charter. So I have the new charter. I set it on to you of what I thought we could give to the feds as kind of a roadmap for moving forward more to implementation of recs, all different sorts of things. But I did send you a charter at one point that you can go back and look at.
Thanks, Holiday, and I will. And I do remember, but I thought that had a broader scope than this, which would have a narrower task ahead of it. But I can certainly look at that.
Thanks. Monica?
Yeah, I just want to point out, and we do this quite a bit in our chapters, but when you're reviewing the data and coming up with a synopsis of the facts, it's also important to consider where we don't know the answers and to include the gaps in knowledge in the areas of research that maybe there are, very clear cut guidelines on, or very broad based assessments made or assertions made where they may not belong. So I think identifying the gaps in knowledge by this advisory panel would be of value as well.
Thanks, Monica. So I'm hearing a kind of broad support for what the substance of the recommendation is, but maybe some disagreement about what the best way to get there is. I don't know if people want to talk. I don't see any other hands up now. So our options are to make a motion and vote on this, or if we want, if anybody has any thing to say about the substance of what Betty and Rebecca put forward in terms of what they're asking, the type of review they're asking, we should talk about that a little bit, but I haven't heard anybody comment on that yet. And it's mostly been on the mechanism for getting it done. Betty?
Thanks, Lyndon. Well, I think we should have a vote, and then if it fails, we can entertain another motion to look at something else. But it looks like Dennis has it, and Jennifer still has.
Jennifer's first. So Jennifer.
Yeah.
I would like to hear more from Ben, or perhaps Dennis was going to address this, about the mechanisms of using the Institute of Medicine suggestion. Like, how would that work? I know they have roundtables, a workshop. I'm not sure if that's like how that actually happens in reality.
Thanks, Jennifer. Dennis?
Yeah, so my concerns would be that this process distracts from breaking new ground and trying to understand the pathogenesis of what the groups that have continuing problems are actually experiencing and how to change that. So if you look at the Fallon study and you look at the Krupp study, neither of them recommends uniform treatment for people with persisting symptoms. In fact, they say the evidence weighs against that for the majority of people. What they do say is we need to understand what it is about these off-target effects of the antimicrobials that are making people feel better, so we can explore better ways to address the illness. In terms of age of studies, the European study was published in 2016, more than 15 years after the earlier studies, and had over 250 subjects who were antibody positive to Borrelia burgdorferi. So I just think that we're wasting our time disagreeing over the study until we find somebody who supports one of the other camps, and are distracting ourselves from advancing the science to find better ways to manage and treat and help this patient population.
Thanks, Dennis. Ben?
Yeah, so I'll respond to Betty's question at the end and kind of a request for a little bit more information about this, and also Jennifer's. I just think for what we want to accomplish, and, you know, in all due respect to Dennis, I think there, you know, my opinion is not a whole lot different than his, except that I recognize the fact that there are some very highly varied views on what these studies show and what they don't show, and where the state of the science is, and what data may have not been evaluated. And, you know, I concede that there's a lot of differing opinions on that. And I just think this is what IOM does best. And I think, you know, I can't support this recommendation for a federal advisory committee, because I just don't see this is what a FAC does. I mean, is in, you know, to research this and define the state of the science. But I would support, you know, the same thing, but say provide funding, you know, to support an IOM workshop or panel or whatever that would have the diversity of views and opinions, that would have a venue for public input, that, you know, whatever else, and to see that, you know, to everyone's satisfaction, that this has been looked at in great detail. And these are the gaps, these are the needs, this is the science that, you know, needs to be done for us to move this forward. And I think this is what IOM does best, personally.
And Ben, could I just ask you to clarify for a second? What would be the end product result of the IOM review? Would it be a report? Would it be, would the workshop be open to the public, or are they usually carried on behind closed doors?
No, they're open to the public, and the deliverable is a report that is a report on the state of the science. And frequently they indicate gaps in what we don't know, and then sort of recommendations on what the highest the highest priority issues are in moving forward. And there've been a number of IOM or NASEM workshops and panels I've taken part with on in the past, on emerging infectious diseases, on climate change, on One Health, on surveillance, national disease, international disease surveillance systems. And I find these reports they carry weight, and they have a wealth of expertise that goes into this. And I just think that really fits well and what the need is, personally.
Thanks, Ben. Betty?
Let's let Monica throw in her stuff.
Okay, Monica?
That's right.
Oh, I just have a question about the IOM. I like the sound of it. I was just wondering how the panel members would be selected in that case.
I'm not probably, I don't know a whole lot about that. I'm struggling with words because I don't know all that's involved in that. I know for the one that we're sponsoring, we are suggesting names to make sure that there are a number of people that we think are really knowledgeable in this area who get involved in this. Clearly on this one on infectious disease causes of chronic illness, we want to make sure that there's a real breadth of expertise and they don't represent just one view or another. But I think at the end of the day, the National Academies decides. They have a panel, they have both their own internal staff, and they have a panel of advisory committee. For example, the emerging microbial threats. There's a standing membership to that committee as far as I know, but I'll stop with that. I don't really know all the details, just a little slice that we've worked with them on.
Leith?
Hey, so I'll just add a little bit more granularity, I think, to that. With regards to NASEM itself, HHS doesn't need to be a partner sponsoring from a monetary standpoint. They can be a collaboration for other resources. And typically, if you do have HHS funding, it's going to be a collaborative approach where you might have other organizations chiming in as well. So when it comes to the actual selection of your review panel or your board members, if it's going to be a workshop versus a roundtable, it is an open forum by and large, where Ben is correct in terms of HHS, whoever is, functioning at the pointy end of the spear with regards to the contracting, they'll help to develop that list of potential or suggested reviewers or contributors. And then the NASEM folks on the other side for that contracting piece are going to vet and have their considerations and do their own review with regards to who participates. So the example I can give, I know Ben had a variety. The one I've been working most with regularly in the recent past has been TBI, where there was some work sponsored by multiple arms of the federal government. And they developed an entire new report that's looking at how do you transform TBI care for the next decade. And it launches off of some previous work done by NASEM in that space that was previously jointly funded by the government as well. So it does give some fodder. It provides a nice venue for esteemed individuals that have, it's not just the impression of that neutrality, but I think there's, at least the groups I've worked with at the National Academies have been quite exhaustive in the approach they've taken and inclusive in the folks that they select. Just one more piece. I wanted to get back to your initial thought, Betty, with regards to the FAC. And I know that the the inclination towards the FAC performing a lit review or some type of systematic review of current literature or past literature could be useful. The only time I've seen that happen is with the type of FAC that's called a board of scientific counselors. And that's something that I think Kay could probably speak to. I'm not putting you on the spot, Kay, but I think when I've seen it used, it's as an advisory group to a director of a center, of a division, of an office, where they do provide a review of current literature, but it's kind of a very, it can be a review of a review almost. So it has a redundancy built into it by nature to be a catch-all for certain things, but it's not the first line that we look at with regards to the proper use of a FAC tool. So I'll stop there, and just, that's not necessarily a vote for national academies, but I do think it's probably the most productive option that could be on the table.
Thanks, Lee. Betty?
I appreciate everyone's dialogue here. I attended the 2010 workshop on Lyme disease, and it was interesting, but one of the big problems with that is who populated that, and it was all IDSA members. And I'm trying to get away from this camp, that camp. I want everyone to be in the science camp. And so because if we could just pull back and look at the science, I think we would find more uncertainty than we think. And the reason I want to go back and look at the early Lyme disease studies is because we are taking conclusions as findings, which is often not the case. So if you're just reading abstracts and conclusions, you're not going to understand the study. And also there's gems of information impacting in that study and those studies, like potential subgroups who might need a different therapy. And the reason I want to do that is that's the biggest group of people we find. And so if we can get those people treated correctly, which might mean different treatments depending on how you present with your EM rash, then we're going to have fewer people to worry on the backside. And so that's why there's use in looking at those studies to make sure we really understand them. And I do think that the HHS is big enough to walk and chew gum, so they can do this little review and still move forward on research. So that's what I'm thinking, but I don't want to belabor this. I think if we have a vote and the FAC doesn't pass, sad, then we could go right back to the National Academy and wrap this up.
Thanks, Betty.
So
Other comments on this issue? Ben?
Yeah, just a comment to the link I put in the chat, and it tells about this meeting that I mentioned, and the toward a common research agenda and infection-associated chronic illnesses, a workshop to examine common overlapping and clinical and biological factors. And in this link, it actually has a tab where you can submit nominations for people to be involved in this. So that's just to say a little bit about their process. And it's a public link.
Thanks, Ben. You know, in this upcoming Institute of Medicine panel, are they going to be addressing kind of regulations for managing patients where there's uncertainty, or and how to take care of them? Because I will say, in looking at our recommendations and in the recommendations of the previous tick-borne disease working groups, I've seen a couple already about looking at websites and that information, but I haven't seen a lot of stuff that actually helps current patients. And I think a lot of us struggle with, what to do when when the guidelines don't say anything, right? Because there's not enough information to give you a guideline there. And I'm wondering, do you know if that's on the agenda for them to tackle?
Yeah, all I can tell you is what it says. There's a pretty good description of this at that website I posted, and there are 4 4 objectives to identify common and overlapping clinical and biological factors, et cetera, to look at the current practice in novel technologies, to develop diagnostic tests for different stages of illness, identification of therapeutic targets and strategies to prevent or impede chronic illness progression, and then coordination and collaboration among various stakeholders and practitioners that will increase research. So it doesn't go in the direction of guidance or regimens for clinicians, but it would define maybe what people have done and what seems to be working or not. But you can read that. And I think a lot of that's still in the planning stages.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. Actually, I hadn't meant individual regimens because, I think for a lot of these, boy, it would be hard to look at that data and say you can come out with a regimen for this specific group of patients. Again, back to the issue of not having great diagnostics, but more along the lines of, and I know this is in your chapter, Betty and Rebecca, what to do. How should physicians proceed when there's not evidence and guidelines to tell them how to proceed, and what to do with patients? There are stories now that are in our report about people who haven't been able to get care that they wanted because they've been denied the insurance. There are physicians who are, who are practicing outside guidelines who, are also coming under scrutiny. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about that. I think it's a very complex issue, and that is something worthy of a much larger review, I think, because the issues are very complex. I would say, I'm not sure, I've talked with Betty about this before, but I myself have done things that are outside the guidelines when it comes to patients with, pan-resistant Acinetobacter. And we do things, there are no guidelines on how to treat them, and we do things outside the guidelines, but nobody comes after my license, right? And during COVID, we all did things that were outside the guidelines, and many of them proved to be wrong, I think, in the end. But again, how do you deal with this when there's that level of uncertainty would be something I would support having a FAC on. I think for me personally, just to state my thoughts is that I do think this is quite narrow for a FAC, and having seen, the discussion before, I'm a little hesitant to vote for a FAC for this particular type of review, but I think a broader review, at the government level would be very useful. So that's my diatribe. Sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that, Lyndon, but it's spot on. It's the struggle that I have is that, and Leith and I have talked about this at length, Betty and I have talked about this at length about the real need for diagnostics and therapeutics, and thrilled that we've got a strategy and things going forward on those, but we've got this interim period where folks are going long periods of time with disease that's unmanaged, and there's lots of variance in what we're doing and causing risk for patients and clinicians alike. And I think that is what this is trying to look at. Whether the FAC is the exactly right mechanism is a struggle for me, because I don't know, regardless of which mechanism we pick, it has to do with who we put on those in the position of making sure we've got that variety of opinions. And I'm not sure, no matter which thing we pick, we're going to get that. And so, I don't know how to craft what we need to make sure that happens, or even making sure we've got the right mechanism. But I know it's a real need. And if we're only going to wait for diagnostics or therapeutics, there's a window where I think we could be doing better by patients.
Thanks, Rebecca. Betty?
Oh, thanks, Rebecca, for that. And Lyndon, you're right. When there's no guidance, you can get crazy situations. I had a clinician where he got insurance to approve additional therapy only to have a pharmacist refuse to fill it. And so it's really a sad gap that we have all these patients falling into. And if we can find a way to address that would be outstanding. I'm hearing everyone's feedback on the advisory committee, but I really don't know that we have a transparent mechanism other than that. So that remains, transparency remains my concern, because if we don't have the right people at the table, no matter how wonderful the National Academy is, they're not going to get us where we need to go. And so I don't know if we have a way of controlling that. But I think, I don't know, I think people might be tired, and maybe we should call the question, and then if it doesn't succeed, then we can move on to structuring something that would succeed.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands up. Does somebody want to make a motion?
Well, I certainly do.
Go for it, Betty.
I move that we approve recommendation 5.1.
Okay,
I'll second it.
Great. Okay, should we take a vote? Jim?
I'm ready, yes. Again, just a reminder, vote either yay, nay, or abstain as I call your name. Holiday,
Yay.
Lyndon,
Nay.
Monica,
Yay.
Betty,
Yay.
Jennifer,
Yay.
Sunil,
Nay.
Kirby,
Nay.
Ben,
Nay.
Rebecca,
I'm going to abstain. I'm struggling.
abstain, got it. Dennis,
Nay.
Robert Miller is not available. Todd,
Nay.
Leith,
Nay.
Gabriella.
Abstain.
Okay, this recommendation does not pass. There was 4 yeas, 7 nays, and 2 abstentions.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Betty, I see your hand up.
Yep, I want to move that we go on and recraft this so that it incorporates the National Academy / IOM. I know IOM is now National Academy, that Ben had suggested.
That sounds great, Betty. Do you want to propose some language there?
How about Ben? I'm not as up to date on how they work.
I'll start it and someone else can add to it. Roll back up to Betty's announcement, Betty's recommendation that we just voted on. So I would say provide funding for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to sponsor the Institute of Medicine / NASM. And I'm not sure the governance between the two organizations. I think IOM, I think it's part of the National Academies. Maybe someone can look that up or verify it. Okay. Okay, provide funding to conduct a comprehensive review of the basic science and clinical evidence for diagnosis and treatment of Lyme disease, Betty? Is that what we want them to do?
Sure. I mean, I wasn't really, hadn't thought about the diagnosis piece, but I think that's important.
It sounds like that's a huge need.
Yeah.
And then I would add on to that and say whatever mechanism IOM uses for this, whether it's a workshop or panel or whatever, they have a number of different sort of things that they can do. emphasize to your point, Betty, that it includes a diversity of experts who represent the full review. I mean, we can pull the same language that we use for this, our federal advisory committee, that have the full range of professional views and opinions on this topic, something like that.
That's a good start.
And can you clarify what this organization was here? I missed that part. The Institute of Medicine / something.
National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. There's in the link there that Gabby put in.
Hey, Dennis.
And so if you add basic, I think you confuse the issue. I haven't heard a lot of discussion about the basic. I'm hearing the interpretation of clinical trial data. And if that's what you really want, I would focus the language on that.
Well, but I'm going to jump in here, Dennis. Well, so one of the things though that I always get concerned about are, so basic science would suggest that maybe we shouldn't use European trials to inform on US patients because of species difference in their pathogenicity. So that would be basic science evidence that we somehow need to get in there too. Would that still fall under?
To me, it still falls under clinical, the eligibility criteria of the study population.
Okay. I mean, right, because I don't want to have to review all the ins and outs of what's going on in a tick, right? I just really want the stuff that applies to how we manage people.
I think it's part of clinical data and clinical trial construction.
Jennifer?
I would like to hear from the people that voted no to provide feedback into this recommendation to see what it, I want to make sure that if anybody's thinking about voting no, what would it take to make this a yes for them?
Okay, so I'll say as somebody who voted no, it really was just the fact. It had nothing to do with the substance of this as a mechanism. So I don't have any problems with this at all. I guess one thing, hearing what the concerns are though, is there anything we can strengthen so that the need for transparency and a broad stakeholder group is even more strongly conveyed? I mean, from the conversations that we were having, that seems to be the big concern with using this mechanism versus the FAC mechanism. And is there something we can include in our language that would, we only make recommendations. So in either case, they would just be recommendations, but is there anything else that we should consider and put in here? Kirby?
Yeah, I mean, my concern was the same as yours. I was a little uncomfortable with the FAC approach. There's a lot of unanswered questions on its, the structure, mechanism, and that kind of stuff. But what you have right now is leaving out that whole part in the original one. You have including public stakeholders or perhaps interest groups, because we do have our various Lyme groups, which were actually reviewed just previously. Before the break, and what they were working on. So I think, instead of just a diversity of experts, you need to get that including public stakeholders and interest groups or something like that are included in that as part of the recommendation.
Thanks. Dennis, is your hand up from before, or do you have a new comment?
I have frozen shoulder.
I don't think we give steroid injections into Zoom. Betty?
So I just was going to make the point that many of the public are actually subject matter experts. I know lots of people who are in the Lyme organizations who really know the science in great detail. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Betty. Leaf?
Not muddying the waters anymore than necessary, but I put in the chat something about, and this is in response to Dennis's comment previously with regards to, and then I think the affirmation from Betty with regards to the focus on the clinical practice and evaluation of, either existing guidelines or what optimal clinical practice could be. Offering another opportunity or tool that could be utilized. At ARC, the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research, or Research and Quality, what they do is they have within one of their centers a division called Evidence-Based Practice. And what they do is a series of different types of offerings through a small contracting agreement within HHS through an IAA, which allows them to tackle with a variety of evidence review options current practice in clinical settings. So what they do is just synthesize evidence, and it can take anywhere from a matter of weeks up to a year, depending on the scalability of the type of evidence they're reviewing and what the desired output may be with regards to what the question is we're trying to answer. The thing that's nice about that is that you're able to have almost like a consultation with them, and they have a variety of folks that are, well-known healthcare researchers that have familiarity with a broad variety of topics. I don't know if I've ever seen an EPC review that was conducted on this area of clinical practice, but it's an option, and it's a really well-known and well-regarded entity within ARC. And that's the place where healthcare quality research is done within HHS. So it's just an option. And I just offer that if folks want to take a further look, and it's something that's done on a regular basis.
Thank you, Lee. Betty? Betty, you're on mute.
So I appreciate the enthusiasm that people are bringing to this conversation and try this venue or that venue. And it's challenging, right? Because we are here at a meeting in late October trying to figure out where's the best place to house this. Something tells me I should sleep on it overnight. But with regards to stakeholders, I think we would just use the language that we had in our, if you scroll down in the rationale, it tells you who the stakeholders should be. If not for this, keep going. There we go. That would be who I would suggest for stakeholders. But, I'm not familiar with the newest one that Leith just brought up. And that always makes me a little nervous, and I'll tell you why. Because there's often we defer to the experts in the field. And so I'm trying to shake the tree and say maybe the experts in the field's opinion shouldn't hold as much weight as you're going to give it. And so without understanding that mechanism, it makes me a little bit nervous. I do understand the National Academy of Science workshop mechanism a little bit better. So I feel like having to decide today with little information is a little bit, makes me feel a little bit risky. I don't know, maybe people who have worked with both can tell me I don't need to worry.
Thanks, Betty. No, I think that's fair. Leif, can I ask you a question about the AHRQ process? Hearing over and over again that one of the main concerns from people in the Lyme community is the transparency and the ability to weigh in. How much does the AHRQ process give people a chance for that? Because my experience with it, and maybe it's a biased experience, was that they're usually neutral experts looking at the evidence, kind of in their own offices. So on the one hand, sometimes they don't involve the actual subject matter experts. Is that true? Or am I completely off base here?
In the interest of not putting my foot in my mouth, I'll have to do a little bit of research and get back to you, because I can't speak to the inside baseball to that degree of granularity and certainty.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Holiday?
I just have a question for Betty regarding this new one that we're putting forth. Do you want to keep it just Lyme disease, or do you want to keep it Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases?
Thank you. At the risk of, I'm not trying to alienate anybody, and I love being inclusive, but right now the problems that we're running into is different for Lyme disease, because there's raging controversy and very widely different even interpretations of what the findings are telling us. And in the other diseases, it's not so much that people are having these controversies, it's just that there's a lot of unknowns, or clinicians just haven't been informed. So I see it as different. I don't know if we broadened it out to that big, if it would be doable, which is the other thing, is because however long this mechanism takes, that's how long we still have continued uncertainty and patients and clinicians being pulled in different directions.
Thanks, Betty.
I'm just wondering, is this something we need to decide on today? I mean, is there any way to get more information that we could come back to this overnight? Because I'm just sensing that there's a lot of maybe agreement for this. And so but which mechanism we use is going to matter, I think. And I don't know how everyone else feels. I hate to kick the can down the road again, but I hate to say yes to something that I'm then going to regret.
Okay. I will say that we are past the time already when we were supposed to end. I don't know how long we have the studio for, which I think is the only real limitation on how long we go, in addition to people's schedules. So I guess one question for Jim and Betty and Rebecca. If we kick the vote on the recommendation until tomorrow, should we continue to review the chapter itself so we can get that done? Will anything in this vote change what you have in the chapter? Or can we move ahead and review the chapter so that we make some more progress and make sure we don't get too far behind? It looked like there weren't a lot of comments in the chapter, so I'm hoping that that goes faster. Betty, you're muted. I think you're trying to say something.
As always, thank you. We didn't get any comments this last time around. And the time before there were very few, and they all got addressed. So I'm hoping that the chapter would move pretty quickly.
How would people feel about holding off on a vote of the recommendation until tomorrow and then moving forwards with reviewing the chapter? Would anybody object to that? I see one hand's up, thumbs up, two thumbs up. No objections so far. Okay, so maybe let's do that. And then people can think overnight and do a little bit more research about some of these different mechanisms that might be suitable for the types of review that that you're seeking. So Kat, can I have you pull up the actual chapter itself? And let's plan on revisiting the recommendation first thing tomorrow morning to make sure that we get it tucked away.
I am muted as well. Betty, is this, I mean, this seems to be the next place. This is new language, it says.
It is. It was the other recommendation, and Ben had suggested this language for us. And I'll let him kind of speak to it if he wants to.
Okay. Again, I was trying to bring something that we could all support in consensus and address the concerns of one of the recommendations for Federal Advisory Committee that I voted against, but try to get to the spirit of what I feel would be good and what the rest of the group wanted. And so it was just that upon implementation of recommendation X.X is the one that we voted on at the last meeting and approved, that HHS would convene whatever the wording was, public meetings, a series of meetings to evaluate where we are in terms of implementation and to make whatever it was, recommendations on prioritizations, regarding specifically, the recommendations from previous reports. And so this recommendation suggests that the starting point for this would be recommendations 7.1 and 7.2 from the 2020 report that dealt specifically with issues of web content and education curricula that have been developed, which were recommendations. Those were recommendations from the 2020 report. And the whole idea that these would be reviewed in a public meeting to just gather input on whether or not they've been implemented, the quality with which they've been implemented, and whatever. In other words, it would start with these as the priority, the first ones that would be looked at, because and it kind of recognizes the how important these are, particularly Betty, to you, to your committee, you and Rebecca's committee. Over.
Well, thank you, Ben. I like this. I thought it puts us number one on the list. Of course, who would not like that? So, so I don't have anything else to add, really.
Okay. Should we not vote on this though until we vote on the one prior, or do we think we should have a vote on this now?
Well, this is different. This one is looking at the education as it is, and the other one is looking at the science. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. Did you, Ben?
I see them as standalone, different. I don't see one contingent on the other. I do see them as different issues, and that they could be voted on independently. But I do, Lyndon, to your point, recognize that we're over time for this meeting. And if there's significant discussion of this recommendation, then maybe we want to wait for it. If everything else in this chapter could be voted on, but the recommendations, and we could check that off our list. But I'll leave that to the rest of you.
I have a question, Kat. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but can you pull up recommendation 5.3? Because I seem to remember there was some discussion about a blended recommendation between, and 5.3 has already been voted on and approved, right?
Right.
So I do remember that we had some conversation about how to blend that and, taking a vote. So I'm a little fuzzy on the details. So I just wanted to bring up 5.3 again. Can you read that for us?
Sure. Fund and support continued and ongoing modification of the federal government websites, starting with the CDC and NIH websites, as well as educational materials and seminars for clinicians, the public, and public health departments to reflect the current state of the science related to, these are some changes, I think, that anyway, I'll just read it. Current state of the science related to persistent Lyme disease / chronic Lyme disease, which is limited, emerging, and unsettled, and to acknowledge that there are divergent views on diagnosis and treatment of patients with PLD, CLD. Oh, and the original wording, it looks like we have over here. I think Betty.
Okay. And the original wording has been voted on and approved. We would have to vote again for these changes. Is that correct?
According to Jim, it was, but these are not substantive changes. They were just kind of
Sure. If they're not substantive, I think that's fine. If people are okay with it being not substantive, then I think that's fine. I guess my question was, how much overlap is there between the new 5.2 and this 5.3? Are they also standalone?
Well, this one is specific to persistent Lyme disease, and the recommendation that we just did, 5.2, is a broader. And this one is already being implemented. I guess I didn't think I had the power to undo a vote, so I didn't undo a vote.
Okay. I guess, again, it gets back to my concern that we have a lot of recommendations focused around website review and all of that. There were 2 from the previous reports, and just, it seems like a discrepancy given that we really don't have anything, to recommendations about what to do with current patients who are suffering. So I look at that, and that gives me pause a little bit.
But how would we, as a tick-borne disease working group, put together recommendations for? I think that's beyond the scope of our work.
Oh, absolutely. No, it would be. This is completely separate. I'm just saying that this is a lot of recommendations focused on kind of website material, that kind of stuff. No, what I would have recommended for the other stuff would have been to pull together a broad stakeholder review that information. That I think would have been, very relevant for a FACA, but that's a separate issue, and I think we're done with that. So sorry, I don't mean to drag this out so that we're here until midnight. But if there's a way to combine, for this part, I just wanted to say is there's a way to combine 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, into something more concise that covers what you want out of it, without devoting so many recommendations to it. That would have been my preference, but we've already voted on 5.3. It's accepted. If we want to go ahead with 5.2, I'm happy with that too. That's fine. I don't have a problem with the content of it.
In a perfect world, I would try to go back and do that. But tonight I'm already going to be looking at which mechanism for 5.1, and there's only so many hours in that.
I know, I understand that, Betty.
Yeah.
And by the way, you've done a great job on this. I know for the record, you've worked really hard on this and been very amenable to listening and changes. So I really appreciate all the work you've done on this.
Well, everyone's working hard, but thank you, Lyndon. But so I don't know, what do you want to do? I'm sure people need to know where we're going.
I think my preference would be to not vote on any of the recommendations right now, move on to the chapter, see if we can get the chapter approved, and then revisit the recommendations tomorrow morning with kind of fresh brains.
Okay.
Is that okay with people?
So I have a quick question. This is Kat. There's 2 bits of text here, so I just want to make sure we're clear on which one is going forward.
So what, in the body of the text, see how it says recommendation XXS? We didn't want to spell out what XXX does right in there, because then you lose the remaining. So this is just an explainer of what XXX is.
Okay, just for the reader.
Yes.
Okay.
Then they don't have to go back to whatever chapter that recommendation appears in.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying.
And Betty and Rebecca, just before we move to the chapter itself, just for those of us who are going to reread this tonight, the rationales are not going to change with the new wording of 5.1. It'll be the same rationale. Is that correct?
I think so. I'll double check it.
Okay.
Ben can look at it too, but I think the rationale would be the same.
Okay, perfect. Great. So Kat, can we move on to the actual body of the